back again into the world of YouTube and the second chapter of Archaon the End Times. So sitting in the cozy den, my colleagues Keith. Say hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
And also say hello to our more southerly philosopher, Vince Varela.
Absolutely, yes. Here down in the warm Southlands.
Yeah. So now that we're back in Sylvania for Chapter 2, and maybe that's a little bit of a tip off to where we're going next, but it seems that my mastery of the Far Squeaker has been a little bit compromised. So therefore, for today's episode, to make things run as smooth as they can, I'm going to pass over the Master of Ceremonies for the most part to Keith, and he's going to be the games master, I suppose, to guide us along here and make the story flow. So, without further ado, then, Keith, I'll let you say a few words.
Well, thank you, Kieran. Yes, I'll be taking over the grave responsibility, no pun intended, for this episode of leading the discussion tonight. So, to kick it off, I'll do a brief recap of what happened in Chapter 1. Essentially, Village the Curseling was besieging Altdorf, and inside Altdorf you had the Emperor, who's kind of back on form, and Ungrim Ironfist, the dwarf. They were being besieged, and then eventually Village was overthrown in a sortie by the Emperor. Archaon comes down with a bunch of frothing, crazy corn loonies, just assaults the walls, cracks the siege in less than a day. There's a bit of showdown between the Emperor and Archaon himself. Before that happened, the Emperor sent a missive to Nagash to try and help him, and Nagash refuses, but Vlad, hearing of the missive, he decides that there is still some honor to be reclaimed in his oath as the Elector Count of Sylvania. So himself and Balthazar Gelt travel south to try and alleviate them. They don't really get there in time, however, Balthazar Gelt does and starts on the road to redemption from becoming a necromancer. So he's able to intervene in the fight between Archaon and the Emperor because it really wasn't looking too good for the Emperor, and he was essentially able to whisk them away. One of the other important things that happened in Chapter 1 was Ungrim Ironfist was, well, we never saw it happen, but very, very likely Ungrim Ironfist is dead, and the Wind of Fire is out floating around in the world again. Chapter 2 opens up with the lesser, if you like, von Karsten, Manfred, and I'll hand it over to Vince to tell us about what's been going on in Sylvania since Vlad left. Vince, you want to take it away? The Far Squeaker is...
Far Squeaker has really torn itself down, eh?
Completely. You want to take it, Kieran?
Well, yeah, I think so. So, where we're staged here, as we open up on Sylvania, is that Manfred von Karstein, being the petty little bastard that he is, has always been jealous of Vlad's position, and more so jealous of how poor old Vlad had kind of slipped in and taken control and gained the favor of Nagash, and not only of Nagash, but of the Emperor, as he was crowned the Elector Count in that stage, right? Now, unluckily, Vlad was noticed by Manfred leaving Sylvania on his little gambit to go to Averheim. So, being the little tattle that Manfred is, he ran to Nagash to try to tell him that, hopefully gaining some kind of favor with Nagash, and at the same time defaming Vlad. Well, it didn't quite work out how Manfred thought it would. He wasn't garnished with all kinds of praise and, with the 1,000 virgins or anything like that. Instead, he was given control and mastery of the defense of the northern marches of Sylvania. Conveniently, just in time for a march of Nurgle demons to come down out of the north and march into Sylvania. So this was made aware to Manfred right away, and he mustered his troops to do some sort of just kind of harrying, effectively trying to slow down the host as it marched towards the Great Pyramid, and that seemingly was the path of the Nurgle host, was to go straight to the Black Pyramid, and they were making a beeline to it. So what Manfred was doing here is initially just harassing them and trying to hold them up. He could sense a presence of malevolence. He could sense a presence of old Sylvania there as well, but couldn't be sure of what it was. But eventually it came to a point where he had to mount a big assault and a big defense, really. But it was luckily bolstered by Luther Harkon, one of the other Mortarchs. So Luther brought his host of pirate zombies and Drekla, his right-hand man, along with him to team up with Manfred, and they eventually made a stand. So here we are with all the hosts arrayed. Also, what's revealed to us at this point is the Nehekaran presence that Manfred sensed actually belonged to the Nameless. And if you remember him from the Nagash book, he was one of the guys that was one of the Mortarchs that Nagash raised up once Nagash himself remanifested. And he was sent to the Northern Marches along with Vlad to initially oppose the Chaos Raid from there. So I think at that point we kind of get to the opening stages of that battle, and I may pass it back to you, Keith, if you want to take us into parts of that.
Certainly. So I just back it and explain a little bit of the politics that's going on here. So one of the reasons why Vlad, as I mentioned, to the aid of the Empire was that he was the Elector Count of Sylvania, and he still felt a bit of loyalty to that. But on the other hand, Nagash has failed to fulfill his promise of returning Isabella to him, so his long-lost love. So he's pretty unimpressed with that. It's kind of the reason why he is has basically switched sides to Chaos is because Nagash promised to reveal to him what his true name was and his history and all that kind of stuff. And again, Nagash fell through on the promise. So Nagash is making enemies left, right, and center. Of course, he still has his loyal thrall, Archaon the Black, doing a lot of the running of Sylvania, while Nagash sits in the Black Pyramid and is trying to absorb as much death power as he possibly can. In anticipation of the war with the Chaos Gods, because he thinks he can take them on by himself. But to get back to the battle, so there's this massive host of Nurgle demons. Nurgle at this point is pretty annoyed that like nothing is living in Sylvania, nothing is growing. There's no festering little funguses or anything like that to enjoy. So he sends his host to try and spread the love a little bit. As Kieran mentioned, the army is led by the Nameless, but there's another presence there as well, who at first is only referred to as the Countess. And then a few hints are dropped now and again about this is actually a vampire, and how there are two souls in one body. One belongs to a demon called Balrog, and the other one is something else, and they struggle, and the other soul gets more powerful at night, and yada yada. To cut a long story short, it's essentially Isabella von Karsten. So Manfred
Exciting.
is mounting his. Sorry, Kieran?
I said, "Oh, that's a big dropper. That's a big name drop there, Isabella."
So Isabella Karsten, not only is she back, but she's in league with Nurgle at this point, and she's got quite a few blessings from old Papa Nurgle himself, which we'll get to in a moment. So yeah, Manfred is essentially just raising up hordes and hordes of zombies, and he's just really waiting. He's playing a delaying tactic. He's not a fan of his pirate brother Archaon, so he kind of thinks like, oh, we'll let the mad pirate bit, and we'll take zombies away and kind of leave them to the demons. And if we can get rid of one more rival, then you know what, the day has not been a total bust. So his strategy: rage a bunch of zombies, wait for all the demons to get engaged, and then he's got a bunch of Vargeists and Vargulfs and Brave He's holding back in reserve where once everything is engaged, she's just a push. So that happens, and for the attack. At one point, notice that Archaon has engaged in a charge himself, and I thought he overpowers Archaon's will and takes all of zombies away. And so is just under a bot, so we don't know what's happened to him for the moment. Manfred is leading the charge on his Abyssal Terror, and then he flies in, and like any good vampire, he knows that the heart of a undead army is to cut off the head, and he knows that he's fighting the Nameless, so he figures, well, probably not a bad idea to deal with the demons that way. So he charges straight to Nameless, and 3 Bargeists come with him. And then he notices that it's Isabella. And those guys on Manfred are not the best of friends. So he's kind of caught off guard, and Isabella uses this surprise in a typical kind of, chemist aristocratic way. She says, "Oh, have you words for family? Are you not happy to see me? Come here and give me a hug," type thing. But then 3 mad Bargeists go straight for Isabella, and she very casually, cuts the head off one, impales the other one, and the third one thinks that he's got a clear shot at her, but she just gently presses the side of its face, and then within seconds it's turned into goop. So Nurgle has given her this ability to basically take anything undead and just break it down into rotting matter, where all the tiny little life and back stuff in it. So Manfred is totally, blown away by his, I guess, stepmother. I don't know how vampire studies go. If anyone has any insights onto that, usually hear it. But
I was actually going to ask the same question.
Essentially, what happens? Yeah, what is she?
Yeah, like what's the relationship there? Is that mom to Manfred?
Well, Vlad is dad.
I think it's stepmom. Yeah, I mean, sort of. Like, in as much as sire is dad, right? So I think it's sort of sire stepmom.
Okay.
Stepsire.
Stepsire. There you go. Yes, I like it.
Probably hates her for all kinds of reasons. Then, if it wasn't his real mom, there's all that keen angst that he had to go through, and struggles between them, power struggles in the home. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly. All right.
Yeah. Third is cut off guard. Demons swarm around him and stop his Abyssal Terror from flying away. And then he kind of engages in a battle of wills with the Nameless. Now, Manfred is a pretty good necromancer, all things considered, and a very powerful wizard. But dominating will and controlling undead, the Nameless is peerless. So without really much effort, just takes 10,000 zombies away from Manfred's control and turns it around. So now there's a pile of zombies and demons pressing in on Manfred, and he can't get away. And Isabella very slowly walks towards him with her arms outstretched, clearly trying to give him like the kiss of death, so that he'll just, she'll turn him to mulch. But Manfred kind of regains himself a little bit, and then blasts the demons and the zombies away. Tries to fly away, but before he can get completely away on stage, Isabella kind of touches or scrapes his Abyssal Terror, and the rotting begins again instantly. But he's able to get away, and he flies to a local pub called the Dead and Deadly.
Can I say one thing real quick, Keith?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I would like everybody to take special note of this scene. Manfred comes so close to death here, right? If she just touches him, just the slightest scratch, he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
He's a pile of goop. So, at the hands of the Chaos Gods, he would have been turned to goop, right? That's what this would have been. This could have broken a different direction. He was milliseconds away from his own death, just barely escaping. I would just like all of our viewers to put a special place in their memory of this, okay? For reasons that will occur a couple episodes from now. But I would like everybody to remember how close the Chaos Gods came to killing Manfred von Karstein right here. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Very.
Oh, I like that.
Before you go on, were you
foreshadowing.
hoping for that? Like, as you were reading this the first time, you're like, oh, yeah, get that bastard. I hate that fool.
Oh, so much. Yes, I wanted her to turn him into just a giant puddle of goop. It would have been fantastic.
Yeah, I hate that guy. He's not cool.
Yeah, you always referred to him as the Jersey boy of the undead, right?
He is the bro vampire. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he wriggles away.
He does. He wriggles away, and he lands outside his the pub called the Dead and Buried, which is a fantastic name for a Sylvanian brew house. And someone opens the door, and lo and behold, it's one of Luther Huss's pirate buddies. And Manfred is a little bit pissed now, so he kills the guy and uses his soul, or what's left of his soul, to heal up his abyssal terror. So the abyssal terror is kind of like, he's healed a bit, he's slowed down the curse, but the thing is still rotting away. But while he's doing this, Archaon comes out, and who's still alive, managed to get away from the demon somehow. I don't know, using pyro tricks, I assume. And he's got his sword to his throat, and basically he's like, "What? You know, I should just kill you right now. You took all my zombies and left me for dead. Like, you suck." And then this brilliant scene turns up where Vlad comes out of nowhere. He comes back from the Empire, right in the nick of time, and he says in the most patronizing way to Manfred, basically, "Oh, look at the mess you've made. Oh, you've made a mess of things. Let's see if we can clean it up, shall we?" And yeah, I love that. I love Vlad's treatment of Manfred, to just, totally treat him like a little child that he is.
You realize how Archaon survived, right? Because Luther Archaon is Jack Sparrow if he was turned into a vampire. Like, that's who that guy
Captain Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, it's exactly. Like, that is who this guy is. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Well, it's just his plucky Captain Dracula always saving him. It's just, yeah, they're the best. So
Yes.
You want to take us through the defense of the Dead and Buried there, Vince?
Sure, absolutely. So the Dead and Buried is this sort of small, old, abandoned inn, and there are 3 courtyard areas to it, or 3 areas of defense that are sort of walled off, as it were. And we have a very small force that has sort of holed up here to defend against what is now a massive onslaught of demons and zombies, because, as you mentioned, Keith, of course, the Nameless still has control of a pretty vast amount of Manfred's former overwhelming army, right? He had him at something like a 10-to-1 ratio at the start of this fight, and now they have about none of that. So they start by, of course, using the zombies, because why wouldn't you? Like, they're their closest ones anyways, and you don't really care. So the Nameless just throws hordes of zombies at the inn. And Vlad is with his Drakenhof Templars, which are his elite Blood Knights. And, they put up a good fight, but they are, the press of flesh is just too much, right? And they start getting dragged down. Zombies are scaling the tower, overwhelming everybody. They make a mention that Manfred's beast, his creature that Nagash had gifted to him and Neferata and Archaon, had recovered enough to just start absolutely stomping and shredding zombies and just creating giant piles of flesh. Okay, and this fight proceeds on, and there's, as usual with most of these battles, there's a lot of just sort of back and forth as there's a great unclean one roaming around here, and he's eventually shows up, starts leading some of the Talibans around, and the people inside start to get overwhelmed, and Manfred eventually is going to sort of re-meet Isabella, as it were, and decide, nope, had enough of this, and he's out. Like, he gives the old, wash the hands of it. I didn't need any part of this. I've already barely survived a couple bad scrapes today. Time to get on out of here. And he bolts because his beast is recovered enough, has now regenerated enough through the dark magics he's been summoning throughout the fight to fly away. So he flies off and is heading back to the Black Pyramid, and we'll pick up with him in a little while.
But who tries to go with him, Vince?
Oh, yes, that's right. I almost forgot about that. You're right. Yeah, Luther Harkon. Yes. He grabs on the foot, right? I don't remember. Does he actually get a hold of the back foot and sort of drag along, or does he fall off?
Yeah, he grabs one of the bone appendages of the abyssal terror, and Manfred's like, nah, man, that's not happening, and cuts his hand off, and he falls down, and then he's got his big pirate cutlass, and he's just hacking left and right at zombies, and then eventually zombies and demons, and eventually he just dies. Oh, yes. No, Isabella cups his hand and turns into goop, or cups his head and turns into goop.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Isabella goops him. That's right.
I thought there was one little bit of kind of poetic justice here as well. Well, not really justice, but Dracula was his right-hand man who had been missing his left arm. So that was Harkon's little sidekick all along.
Oh.
It was his right arm that Luther Huss lost as Manfred hacked it off. So, and then he landed on the ground right beside Dracula. So it's like two beings with each the other side of the arm that had to kind of struggle away a little bit for a while before they eventually met their demise. Thought that was fun.
That's a good catch.
And then we come to maybe my favorite moment in this chapter. And that is Vlad, who is just making a mess of demons and zombies and all enemies alike, of course, because he's a whirlwind. And though he's still sick with the Glotkins, we remember the Glots poisoned him, and that's always been paining him and sort of slowing him down and taking him off of his A game, because as it is, he's really one of the most powerful vampires in the world. But he's still got that Glot poison running in him. But even that, he's still more than fast enough to make all the piles of zombies and plague bearers that you can throw at him. They then part, and that's when, as Vlad sort of starts to retreat and kind of gets himself an opening, that's when the Nameless, occupying Luther Huss's body, intercedes. So now we have this showdown of the Nameless riding the husk of Huss into a showdown. And I love this scene. The Nameless is incredibly powerful. Luther Huss was a very powerful warrior priest as it was, and Vlad is sick and weary from all of the battle he has already fought. And he's barely holding Huss at bay, and finally the hammer comes down and kind of catches Vlad in the shoulder, and the whole time Vlad is basically petitioning to Huss directly, saying, I know you can hear me, priest. He's doing the whole movie, I know you're in there, remember who you are. He's doing that thing. And the Nameless is just laughing and saying, look, there's no way. I've got this guy on lockdown. What's the matter with you? That's a cute trick you're doing, but it's not going to happen. And Vlad reaches out and summons a sort of last-ditch amount of dark magic, looking as though it's his last hope. And he raises up all of these ancient and buried dead from beneath the inn, and a bunch of new undead spring to life all around the Nameless, who is in Huss. And the Nameless laughs and basically says, don't you get it? This is exactly what I do. And he spreads his consciousness out to take over all the new undead, and that's when Vlad is like, exactly, and you spread it too far. And he spread it just far enough over all these new summoned undead for Luther Huss, who's been trapped inside of here, to have that one crack to get through. And the fire of months of rage of this very sacred warrior watching the Nameless commit these atrocities in his body comes to bear, and the holy fire of Sigmar just burns and just flows through that crack and immolates the Nameless as he explodes out with the full fury of Sigmar and retakes his body. Love it. Just fantastic. The Nameless is soul and body are just, or the soul and spirit of the Nameless is immolated as Huss regains control of his own body. Just fantastic. And that then turns us to a very nice scene where we now have a very unusual pair of allies. If there was ever the enemy of my enemy is my friend, it is Luther Huss, one of the most holier-than-thou warrior priests, now basically fighting back-to-back with Vlad von Karstein, King of the Vampires, against an endless wave of demons. And that's when we come to the last combatant of the demons, who then...
So just before you go on there...
Pass that over to somebody else. Yeah.
Well, just before you go on, I just... you kind of get the idea that, like, Huss is sitting on his horse, and Vlad is standing down beside him, and they look at each other, and then they kind of look around and see the horde, and they kind of, like, just nod slightly to each other as if, okay, we know we're not getting out of this. This is kind of the last charge. You know, let's put our differences aside and, you know, let's just go for it. And it reminded me of the scene from Chapter 1 where the Emperor turns to Jared the Knight, and it's just kind of like, one last charge? And the other guy was like, one last charge! And then they charge.
Yes.
And I thought it was a really nice kind of parallel between that. I don't know how intentional that was by the writers, but I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, as the end comes, strange alliances are born left and right. I mean, that one isn't weird, but it's that thing, right? Like, in desperation, any ally in the storm. It's just like Gelt being instantly forgiven because now is not the time to turn away an ally.
Exactly. So I think, Kieran, why don't you tell us about the final showdown of this part of the chapter, the big title fight. Well,
I think what's kind of curious about this is I agree with you that moment where those two guys are united together, it creates a good image. But unfortunately, it's so very short-lived, because the next thing that happens within a matter of a few milliseconds, it seems, is that Isabella just springs out of the darkness, and it actually describes it as her leaping onto the back of Huss's horse, stabbing a couple claws into his throat, and then drawing them across his neck so that he just bleeds out and he's done in an instant. And much like anything else that she's touched so far, just kind of bubbles down into a gooey pus ball of nurgleness. So a moment of elation to an instant moment of sadness as you read this thing. You're like, oh, well, that was going to be fun, but now it's not.
It is very depressing. It is a depressing moment.
Yeah, so then, of course, we're kind of been leading up to what could, again, potentially be a big emotional reuniting of Vlad, who the only reason that he kind of agreed to be reborn with Nagash back in those days when he was creating the Mortarchs was for the sake that he was promised that he would be reunited with Isabella. But obviously not in this particular way. This is not how he dreamed about this to come together. So they have this sort of stare down and realization that this is kind of how it all is, and all of the zombies that are still teeming around actually stop and pause, and so do all of the plague bearers that are still standing around. They stop and pause and just kind of watch this happen like a big grand audience. And Isabella opens up the conversation by chiding Vlad for hiding behind a warrior priest. And then they get into their dialogue a bit back and forth about how, you know, Vlad tries to appeal to her and say, I know that you're not what you really are, that you do have a demon behind there. And he tries a little bit of his same kind of ploys that he tried to separate the Nameless from Luther Huss a few moments before. But Isabella is a bit bitter still. Like, she kind of has been brought into the belief that Vlad was always treating her not as an equal, although he tries to say that he does. And she was forever in his shadow and as a pet. So you kind of the bitterness wells up, and eventually, after a bit of dialogue back and forth, Vlad realizes that she's lost. There's no regaining her. There's not going to be a repeat performance of pulling her consciousness out of there like he did with Huss a moment ago. So eventually he just acquiesces to that and says that, and maybe it's worth a little bit of a read here of a quote from Vlad, as he says, "I came back from the void for who you once were, not to be taunted by the creature you have become. I will return there gladly, because this world has nothing else to offer me." And then that was it. So then, Isabella laid the hands down, and life flickered out of Vlad, and death came to him. Although in his last breath he swore revenge upon the god of Nurgle in feeling that last touch, as Isabella gave him the business. So, sad times. Poor old Vlad, one of our heroes, gone.
Yeah, I feel like the prom king got his heart broken. Yeah, it was cool. I liked how it did, because in the end you feel pity for Vlad a little bit. Like, he's this horrible vampiric undead monster. But all he really wanted was Isabella, and it didn't work out too well for him. But
yeah, he sure did. I mean, even when we were back in Nagash and talking about it with Vince and with Josh back then, Vlad was a group favorite. He's the guy that he evolved as a character, whereas a lot of the other characters, as we say through the end times, either were ones that were quickly introduced and then immediately dispatched, or they were ones that, I guess, when we got into Cain, we kind of developed a bit of character transition with guys like Malekith and Tyrion, but never quite in the same kind of heroic way that you made an attachment with Vlad. So he doesn't get back with the girl. That's a bit of a sad thing, and the hero is gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Do you have any parting words for Vlad?
Gone but not forgotten.
Well, I mean, he's come back before, so
he does have a nasty habit of not being dead.
It's true. He's consistently undead.
Yeah, if he's anything like Krell, he'll be back 7 more times.
You can't keep a good vampire down. That's the point.
So here, after this bit, we have a little aside where we go back to Archaon, who's hanging out in Althor. And he's talking to one of the Vermin Lords. And he's sitting on his throne of skulls, or whatever it is. And very importantly, he's got Galmaraz there as well. So this is the Hammer of Sigmar, which he'd stolen when he killed, he didn't kill Valton, but when Valton was defeated at his and he's basically telling the Vermin Lord that he wants something from Nagash's Black Pyramid. And the Vermin Lord is kind of like, oh yeah, no, we can get that for you. Is it worth anything to you? Like, is it precious? And like, Archaon kind of reflects on how, these giant demon horned rats are really just a personification of the earthly cousins, right? Like, just the Skaven. The Vermin Lord is, not subtle in its wanting of whatever it is that Archaon wants, and Archaon knows that he could find a dagger or a weeping blade in his back from these things as soon as he turns around. But, he doesn't really care about these Skaven. He'll use them as a tool and then discard them as soon as they're done. So yeah, he just says, yeah, it's precious. He knows how to push their buttons, and he says, I want you to do this for me. Go get it. It's precious. Come back and talk to me later. And I think that was kind of the sum total of that. I didn't really get anything else out of that passage, but maybe I was missing something. Did you guys take anything else from that?
Archaon knows how to play the fiddle of the Vermin Lords very well, as he deftly manipulates that particular Vermin Lord. I take him to be sending not my interpretation of this was actually that he's sending him somewhere else, not to the Black Pyramid, but for something else he's looking for.
Oh, okay. All right. So if we're back in Sylvania then, so Manfred, he skulks back to the Black Pyramid, and the description of this is I really enjoyed because it was like Manfred was busy on the right there preparing all of his excuses to give to Archaon and Nagash on how it wasn't really his fault, it was everyone else's fault, and I thought, oh, that's a very Skaven side of Manfred that we haven't seen before. And as he pulls up to the Black Pyramid, he sees that the forces of Archaon and Nagash are already arrayed. So you have your Tomb Guard and a bunch of zombies, your skeleton warriors, the giant sphinxes. They're all arrayed, and Archaon is ready to lead the battle. So Archaon is kind of chastising Manfred on his defeat at the Dead and Buried and holding back the Nurgle Horde, and kind of says like, look, in very like subtle terms, but very he's certain about what he knows. He basically says, look, I know you screwed up, but I won't tell Nagash if you do this one thing for me. And Manfred's kind of like, all right, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I want you to go to Neferata, who's also not very impressed with Nagash. Nagash is phenomenal at being his Mortarks and just really annoying them. Go to Neferata and basically get her back on our side because we need her here to help lead the armies. So Manfred goes to Neferata's palace in the Silver Mountains, and Neferata is furious, not least because her palace has been totally wrecked. First by dwarves, which came into the place and stole all the precious stuff, and then Skaven, and then goblins. The remains of the goblins are still scattered around her chambers. So she's not in a particularly happy mood. To add insult to injury, she's also lost her an entire network of spies. So Neferata is the Queen of Mysteries. She's a typical Lamian vampire or vampire, and she relies on intrigue and manipulation rather than just direct conflict. But now, thanks to the invading chaos and the wars that have been going on in the Empire, all of that is gone. Her entire empire, her dynasty, has been just taken away from her. So she's got one thing left that she wants, and that's Khalida. And Manfred basically says, well, Archaon says that I can give you whatever you want, and Khalida is well within the bounds of things that I can give you if you come back, rejoin Nagash, and take over his armies in the defense of his Black Pyramid against the Sea Fort. So she agrees. So she hops on her Abyssal Terror, and they hop on back to Black Pyramid. So Vince, do you want to take us through the opening of the battle of the defense of the Black Pyramid? Like most undead things, I think it's very grindy. So do you want to just go through the setup and then highlight a couple of key points that you liked?
Absolutely. So the first thing to note is that Archaon thinks that he has this one, but he's not as overconfident as Manfred. He has layers of traps, and he has rallied the entire forces, but he wants to do this without waking up Nagash. Nagash is still down there absorbing death magic, and Archaon would like to put a nice bow on this, and as Nagash wakes up, basically say, look what I've done for you. I'm totally awesome. You're welcome. Don't worry about it. It's all good. You keep absorbing that death magic, buddy. I've got your back. And so he sends Krell out with all of the sort of vampiric undead, Vargeists and Vargulfs and such, to just harry and assault and basically suicide squad against the demons. He doesn't like them. He sees them as lesser, uncontrollable undead. Archaon is at his heart from Neferata, and he likes Neferatan tactics. Battle lines, chariot ranks, horsemen in flanking positions, a very ordered, civilized battle, not the ravenous blood hunger lunacy of these monsters from Sylvania. So he just tries to sort of get rid of them and do some damage at the same time, which he does. He does batter and bloody the demon's army. They don't have the same ability to just regenerate their forces. that the undead possess. So the Black Pyramid is in the middle of this big lake of death magic, and it is connected to the shore by this thin isthmus. Isthmus. That's a hard word. And Archaon has laid a trap. He's arrayed his forces on the isthmus with the hope of drawing in Isabella to march down to where she's sort of in a pincher maneuver, as he will then call up all of these Morghasts. He has hidden thousands of Morghasts, the angels of death with this divine heritage, in the lake, as they are the only beings. Even the undead really can't survive in that water for long, skeletons and such. But the Morghasts can, because they are of a direct divine heritage. They're basically angels that were killed by Nagash and then given unlife, so they can withstand it. And his plan is to draw her in, spring up the trap, close the door. That's a dead army. There you go. And Archaon is convinced that Isabella is really the anchor of this army. He watches the battles go, and she always sits in the middle. She doesn't engage in battle. He's convinced that she's the one anchoring this army. He knows that they need, that these armies need, the demonic armies need some kind of anchor point, especially in this land, which isn't honestly very favorable to them. Certainly the winds of chaos are spreading, but death holds sway in Sylvania, not chaos. And the wind of death is really pretty anathema to chaos. Chaos requires change. Death is unchanging. So it's a problem. They need that anchor, and she's it. So the battle's engaged, and very slowly at that. She takes her time. She really seems to be just kind of letting the Talibans get into exact position, ring their little bells. Nothing is going quickly. And we come to learn the reason of that very soon. There's some sort of initial skerfluffling as fights are engaged and phalanxes crash against things, and, you know, the battle kind of happens. But we come to learn that there is another force in this battle that neither side is really aware of, and that is the Skaven.
Before you talk about those guys, I want to interject on a couple of quick things, because that's going to be very exciting for you.
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
What I was, you know how we look through these, the layouts of what their participants are? You know, they always have that before a big battle of, you know, these are the participants and these are the units.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What I read in Krell's Doom Legion, which I thought was very cool, was that after returning to Sylvania, Nagash had sent out a bunch of necromancers all across the four corners of the world to summon and return the original members of Krell's Doomed Legion and bring them to Sylvania. So I thought that was a pretty sweet deal, that they kind of pulled all that together. So it was actually the original Chaos Warband that Krell was part of, and then fought with him in their undeath for a while, that they returned into the action. So I thought that was a very cool thing.
That is a very cool thing.
Also, in the opening stages of the battle, a couple other cool things that I thought were good was, you touched on the fact that that Isabella has taken her sweet time, and they described it was 3.5 days in staging within sight of the Black Pyramid that the Nurgle set up their shop before they actually took a step forward. And Archaon was so very patient throughout this whole thing, but he kept having a little bit less patient Tomb Kings and Tomb Princes keep on coming to him saying, "Hey boss, is it time? Can we go get him now? Is it time? Is it time?" And eventually Archaon became impatient with this, and he just murdered one of them. Like, he sent, actually, oh no, I correct myself, it wasn't him that murdered him. He sent Krell out to murder the one guy and made an example of him, saying, no, we will be patient, we're going to wait for this. So those were my two cool moments in the opening stages before the big reveal of the Skaven happens. So I'll send it back to you.
That's fair. Keith, any other moments that you particularly liked?
No, I think you guys pretty much covered it.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to tell us what's going on with Skaven?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we come to the Skaven, the secret force in this battle. And they are not marching with the demons. They are not sneaking around on land. In fact, they're doing what Skaven do best. They are tunneling. And Ikit Claw has been recruited and made some new drills. And they've been drilling for weeks. Before the demons even entered, they started these tunnels. And the problem is that the lake showing up has rechanged their entire map. So they're having to very carefully drill these test boreholes, because if they accidentally hit the Lake of Death, in flows water that is quite literally death liquefied, and it just flows into the tunnel and murders the drill team and everybody else, because the second it touches them, they just fall over dead, because it's just death. This is the raw essence of death magic. So they have to drill all these extra overflow tunnels, so that the only people killed will be the actual drill team, which, boy, that has got to be a really crappy job even by Skaven standards. And Ikit Claw is driving them forward. And what's interesting is they set up that he needs to arrive in a very particular window of time. He needs to be not too early and not too late. There's an exact time he needs to show up. And he's sort of back there with his stopwatch, and yes, he really does have like a watch. They even call that out, that he's got like a full-fledged timepiece he's watching, because of course he does, he's Ikit Claw. And he's just sort of counting off the time, like not quite fast enough. He's like adjusting the drills to go faster or slower to try to hit this exact window. And they're tunneling up and trying to get in at exactly the right time. At this moment, as they're closing in on their tunnel, in a darkened chamber deep in the heart of the Black Pyramid, Nagash wakes up and has decided that he will participate in this battle after all. And he sort of draws himself up and carries his way out of the pyramid to go and deal with this demonic menace outside of his gate.
Mm-hmm. So as that Skaven tunneling is going on, what's been happening up above is that Isabella, she eventually makes it to the isthmus, and she's escorted by a bunch of great unclean ones. Now, Krell is around, petition of punishment, Archaon's flying around, his abyssal terror, smiting things, and Papa Nurgle from the realm of the gods sees this, and he's a benevolent god, he's a loving god, so he tips over whatever he was cooking up in his cauldron, and it starts raining in the mortal world. And it creates this weird sludge, and, the zombies start decomposing faster, and, he's trying to help his guys out. But of course, Archaon is right next to a giant moat of death magic, so he starts making giant purple crystals, and then shredding things with them. So kind of balancing off the power of God there, essentially, which is kind of cool. But as Isabella, she hits the isthmus, Archaon thinks, fantastic, and he springs his trap. And then, as Vince said, there's thousands of Morghast hanging out down there, and they swoop up and start basically going for Isabella. But they didn't bank on the plague drones in the sky, so now there's this giant aerial war going on between the plague drones and the Morghast and things like that. So through Archaon's magics and a bunch of the undead and the Morghast, there's only one great unclean one left protecting Isabella. And Krell, the man of the hour, he runs in and tries to swipe this great unclean one. So they're going back and forth a little bit, and Krell at one point, he takes a flail to the side and gets knocked over, and a couple of his ribs are smashed, but not before breaking the flail. And then he kind of figures out the Great Unclean One's attack pattern. It's kind of a video game boss, and realizes that the Great Unclean One's pretty big and slow, so when he swings his sword, you get in under the arm, and then you hit him in the belly. So Krell's chopping away. At one point, he gets his axe stuck in the Great Unclean One. And it's at this point that Isabella whips out her chalice, which normally, back when she was a full-blooded vampire, contained blood and could be used to heal herself or heal Vlad. But now, when she pops off the lid, it just sends forth a cloud of rot and corruption. So all the undead within a large radius, they just melt. And even Krell, his armor just becomes one giant lump of rust, essentially. So the Great Unclean One, who's protecting Isabella at this point, sees this as an opportunity to have a snack, basically picks up Krell and swallows the guy whole. But at this point, the Great Unclean One doesn't feel too good about his impulsive decision. He gets a bit of a tummy ache. Now, Archaon, emboldened by this, that the Great Unclean One's not doing too well after this, he seizes this opportunity and sets Isabella on fire. And because he notices that she hasn't been using any of her vampiric powers, right? This is a host mostly made up of demons for the Isabella side. So she hasn't been raised and dead. She hasn't been using her necromantic powers or anything like that. So Archaon uses some of that death magic, that necromancy, to set her on fire. She eventually gets out a counterspell, but she is horribly badly burned. And he sees this opportunity to finish off Isabella once and for all. So he takes some of the souls that are used to bind the Black Pyramid together, crafts himself a little shield, and then goes in for the charge. So she tries to surprise him, but again, he's got his shield, and then he uses the same trick on her again to try and set her on fire. However, she reveals that she still does have her necromantic abilities, and is able to take that fire and send it right back at him. And every time it wounds him and hurts him, she's able to heal herself up. So all the black skin starts slowing off, and the regenerative capabilities of Nergal heal her up until she looks like the old Isabella von Tark. So his shield is holding out for a little while, and then eventually it just collapses. Even with all of that death magic just inches away from him, he can't summon enough power, and he is just burnt to a crisp. And at this point, Nagash shows up, and he is not happy. And one of the things I love about Nagash turning up is when Nagash talks, it's all in capital letters. And it just reminds me so much of, if anyone's familiar with Terry Pratchett, the Discworld novel, it's just, that's how death speaks, all in capital letters, and that's just Nagash for me. So I really enjoyed that. But Nagash was, what's that, Kieran?
No, I was just going to say that's a good nod that you give to Terry Pratchett's death there, because I felt exactly the same thing.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's all just the most potent of overwhelming speech that comes down from above. And it kind of quite literally does with Nagash, because he's, 30 feet tall with his giant hat and all that action.
Yeah, the hat adds a good...
So that's a big deal. One other cool visual about Nagash is it describes it as him walking forward, and every time that he laid his foot down, it laid out a bunch of purple sparks that would come out from underneath him.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
That's cool visual.
Yeah. So he comes out and he just starts shooting green fireballs from his eyes and killing demons left, right, and center, banishing them back. And then he confronts Isabella, and you can again, it's a great visual. Like you said, Kieran, he's 30 feet tall, and Isabella's just a normal woman-sized vampire, and he's just looming down, demanding, what do you think you're doing? What kind of an upstart are you? And then he even says, I searched the void for your soul, and now I know why I can't find it. So you see that, Nagash actually did try and keep his promise to Vlad. He looked for Isabella's soul to try and bring her back. But she had already thrown in her lot with Nergal at this point. And he just so can't comprehend what kind of insolence this is, and demands to know what she thought she could accomplish by being this, horde of demons into his realm. And then she just starts cracking up, laughing, and just saying, it's all a distraction. And then we have the Skaven. So Kieran, why don't I turn it over to you? You want to talk about the Skaven?
Well, I don't know if that's entirely my realm. I feel like I'd be stealing a bit from Vince's thunder. Although I did play a game of Warhammer with the Skaven today, it still doesn't make my devotion to the Skaven quite as much as Mr. Venturella.
Very well. I'll turn it over to Vince.
I am happy to take it. As two of my great loves, the undead and the Skaven battle each other here. And the Skaven deal Nagash a more mortal blow than anyone would have believed possible as this explosion rips across the plane. Ikit Claw had tunneled his way up where? Right into the Black Pyramid. And the timing that he had been so seeking after was before the demons had been defeated, but after Nagash had decided to join the battle himself. And Ikit Claw was right on time. He tunnels up, and of course the place is not undefended. There are many Ushabti around, ancient sort of constructs, and of course those get dealt with fairly easily because they're Ushabti. I would expect Nagash to have some better servants in there. Not bad choice on him, but we get one really nice Ushabti. You actually meet an Ushabti character, a guy named Verisoth, who was himself a very great necromancer who Nagash basically allowed to sort of keep living by sticking him into this construct. And Verisoth sort of leads the attack against the Skaven. And don't get me wrong, they give a good fight. The problem is, in the end, Ikit Claw has brought 6 bombs. 6 of these massive, massive bombs. Each one I imagine to be sort of like a nuclear weapon, really. Now, Ikit Claw figures he needs 3 of them to completely evaporate the pyramid, basically. So he brought 6, because that's just common sense. And sure enough, 3 of the warp engineers carrying them get killed or distracted or taken out. But 3 of them don't. And one guy finally basically kind of runs up with, like, juggling 3 of these bombs. And I picture them, Ikit turns around and sees how close they are to detonating. And he realizes, I picture them kind of like going beep, 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 and it's getting really faster, and he looks and he's like, oh, those are about to blow. And he just skitter leaps himself out of there. Because everybody teleports now, as we've covered. He teleports away, and in a little puff of green smoke, as that engineer is just sitting there, because nobody else actually knows what's going to happen here except him. He was the only person who actually understood the whole plan. None of the rest of the Skaven knew that this was a complete suicide mission, but that is in fact what it is. As boom, and he realizes that they're going to detonate on off timing, and he's hoping that the one bomb will burn hot enough to burn the casing off the other 2 and then ignite them. And that is exactly what happens. And in short order, boom, boom, boom. They blow up, and the Black Pyramid is basically reduced to rubble. From its floating position above the Lake of Death, it explodes out like the Cobra sort of jet carrier at the beginning of G.I. Joe the movie. This thing just explodes out and falls to ash. The Black Pyramid, Nagash's greatest and original creation, is reduced to rubble. And everything inside is also destroyed. Bodies are flung thousands of feet, miles out. One of those bodies is Verisoth, the Ushabti, who is near the edge of the place and gets blown out an open sort of window and survives of all ridiculous things to happen. He was thrown clear, apparently. So we get our nice little Ushabti character that lives, which I rather enjoy. But in this moment of explosion, Isabella sort of looks and is like, oh, crap, this went down. And she turns and flees. Like, she vampire speeds her way out of there. She can't teleport, apparently. Shame on her. She should have some kind of plague teleport, probably. But she flees, and Nagash, upon seeing this, well, he's, shall we say, nonplussed. And he burns all of the death magic in that lake, all at once. Everything he hadn't absorbed. He sucks it all up, and in a massive, it's not even really a spell, it is just his anger given magical form, and it travels out in this purple wave, this EMP pulse of just destruction and death across the plains, and eradicates every demon from his land. Isabella is similarly sort of rides the edge of this wave in this very Doctor Strangelove fashion, and she gets thrown several miles away, but lives, and Nagash falls to his knees, which I particularly like, because as you said, he's so tall and so huge, and I was riding these spirits and sort of floating. But now to watch the great necromancer humbled, he falls to his knees, and he's not like openly weeping, but I picture him really sad and distraught at this moment. I think they really imply that. I mean, I don't think he's a sentimental fellow, right? And he has as little humanity as could be possible. But the pyramid meant something to him because it represented his plans and everything he was doing and all the power he had been seeking after. And all at once, that is all gone. And not only that, but he realizes in his moment of anger, he had cast out so much power to create that spell that he was distastefully little better than any of the other incarnates who had an entire wind of magic in them. Though he was still an incarnate and had the full power of death, he was little better than the rest of them now. He was mighty beyond any mortal kin had previously imagined a being could be, but he knew at that moment that he could no longer equal the Chaos Gods.
Yeah, I got the impression that, like you said, he's not a sentimental guy, but he was just so upset about the pyramid and then frustrated at himself for wasting essentially all of that magic, that it was enough to bring him to his knees, which, I thought was a great visual. Kieran, do you want to take us home on this one? The fallout of Nagash?
Yeah, a couple of quick tidbits here that I maybe wanted to discuss with you guys. The way that Isabella goes down, like you said, she gets hurled back, but the passage here reads that her flesh endured where the demons had not, but as Isabella lay broken and tangled, she felt Bolorog shriek in her mind. The demon within her blood was in agony, and through the link that she shared, every moment of his terrible pain. So do you feel that she pulled this off because she is still part undead? Like that's why she survived, but the demon inside got roasted? You get the same impression, guys?
Certainly, and I think, I certainly wouldn't be surprised if she were to throw off the demonic possession and go back to being full undead after this. Because it said earlier in the chapter that they struggle constantly, and now that demon is severely weakened. So, yeah, that's definitely the take home I get from that.
I agree. I think it's her weird nature. She's really the only being like this in the world that is sort of so full, half undead and half demon lord all at the same time. And I think, yes, that's the only thing that let her survive the wind of death.
Yeah.
Need a couple more points here?
When we come back to the scene, then we have Nagash, who is still kneeling when Manfred and Neferata come to his side, and they just kind of stare on in silence for a little bit, and they realize that the great necromancer could well have been destroyed in the explosion if he had been inside the pyramid at the time. So because they're catty bastards and they're looking for the leg up, they realize that crap, this was another opportunity that we missed out on to wrestle power away from Nagash. But they still also recognize that he is, even though he's just used up all that energy, he's still beyond their reach at this point. But they're going to stick it with it to see if he gets weaker along the way, and they're both plotting for their opportunity to strike. Now, he goes into some contemplations here, Nagash, and actually there is one passage here that I thought was very cool, and that he is contemplating an encounter that he had with Teclis years and years ago when he was still in the spirit realm. So this kind of casts it back and lets us recognize again how deep the roots of Teclis' involvement in all of these things that have gone on through the end time story so far have even occurred. So his plan goes back even well before Manfred was starting to gather artifacts, and Archaon came into position to start gathering things to eventually raise Nagash. So Teclis had it in him at that point to recognize that chaos was going to be a trouble, and he already had the plan that Nagash was going to be one of the ways to oppose chaos. Well before even Manfred and Archaon had that thought. So that's pretty far-reaching, I think, and it's only covers a couple paragraphs in here, but I think it's pretty far-reaching, and it holds a lot of weight to Teclis again as a character. What do you guys think about that moment?
I found that to be one of the most interesting things to come out of this chapter, certainly. I mean, the destruction of the Black Pyramid and this reveal that Teclis has been leading up to this for decades, planning this, knowing that the Chaos Gods were going to try and come to ascension, and clearly, or at least I get the impression that Teclis took a really big hand in precipitating Nagash's reincarnation. Right? I mean, like, we already know that he used the Everchild to make Nagash imperfect, such as that he wouldn't be completely all-powerful. But now it appears that he kind of kicked off the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. What do you think, Vince?
Okay. Well, getting back to it then.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I love the far-reaching scope of Teclis' plan. He is truly the mastermind of this whole story, right? There is no character that has been more important to the actual motivation of the plot than Teclis.
Richard, anything else?
So getting back to Nagash and his ponderings then, I think the way that we'll carry it from here is he ponders the situation a little bit, and Vince, you had mentioned before that he actually humbly comes to the realization that he can no longer alone oppose the Chaos Gods. So he finally gets up, he strides across the battlefield and looks upon his servants, and he comes over to the pile of ash where Archaon is left there, where he had that bit of a bout with Isabella, and he also comes across the remains of Krell. And although he thinks to himself, well, these two have failed me, so they don't really deserve resurrection, but we kind of need all the help we can get in the upcoming battle, so he expends a bit of his immortal energies in restoring Archaon and Krell once again back to their former selves. And then he announces, effectively, that it's time to march, it's time to gather the host, and we are heading to the west. You, Neferata, you are going to stay here with the Tomb King bits, and you are going to be the master of Sylvania while we're away. Manfred, get on your horse. Archaon, get on your horse. We are going west. And once again, Manfred, being the pouty bitch that he is, he gets upset about the fact that he still doesn't get to be the master of Sylvania. That's left to the girl to do. But again, he regales in the fact that if Nagash is going to put himself in danger, he's going to be the guy that's going to be right there to take over when he slips up. So he does get on his back, and in the closing of the curtains on this chapter, Nagash decides that he is going to Athel Loren to hang out with some elves.
That's right, we're going back to our elf buddies. We haven't seen them since Cain.
Yeah.
And now they've got a big bad new ally in Nagash, which is kind of what the Emperor wanted all along, and Teclis, so it seems like they're getting their way. So it makes you wonder, well, maybe not, maybe I'm getting a little conspiratorial here, but everything has had Lilius and Teclis' hand in it. So you wonder if any of these machinations, maybe from the Skaven or Archaon or anything like that, could have been a result of the manipulations of Teclis or Lilius in order to force Nagash's hand into allying with the rest of the incarnates. Don't know if it's a thing, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised to find out later on that something happened to convince, to precipitate that whole chain of events. What do you guys think? Maybe I'm just talking crazy.
No, I think you're right. I think at this point, yes, that is still absolutely what's going on here.
Yeah, I can't rule those two out of anything anymore. Like, they're just up to so much. It could be anything.
Oh, and we're going to get so much more of their hand in,
and with Teclis'
in the
words
coming
here.
times.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, with Teclis' words here and his reveal that he talked to Nagash in the spirit world and said, "Hey, buddy, chaos is going to be a bad thing, and you know you might want to be there for it. You know, if that happened years and years ago, there's no reason to believe otherwise or to be surprised by, you know, how many pots and how many fingers Teclis has to be in all of these pots at the same time."
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, if you don't have any further thoughts, Keith, why don't we close it out here? I'll let you bring it to a close because again, my far squeaker is only suboptimal.
Okay, well, yeah, no further thoughts from me. I thought that was a pretty good chapter. We learned some interesting things. The plot has advanced quite significantly. So that's it for tonight. With that, I will say good night from me.